Someone suggested she write you a letter, and the Queen said that's a good idea.
Yes, the Queen never read this letter because it was a horrible letter.
So before she met Harry, you had no doubt she was your sister.
I called her my sister.
Hey everyone, welcome to Behavioral Arts. My name is Spidey and I use my degree in sociology and psychology, my certifications in criminal interrogation and body language analysis, and over 10 years experience as an award-winning mentalist to teach people behavioral analysis and practical psychology on stages and television shows all over the world. Earlier this week, 7 News released an exclusive spotlight interview with the Markles. But no, not the Markle you're thinking of. This was actually with Meghan's father, brother, and sister. So Thomas, Tom Jr., and Samantha. The video also had an interview with Lady Victoria Hervey, who had some very interesting behaviors while talking about Prince Andrew. So this analysis is going to be split into two. In this video, we're going to look at the Markles, and in a few days, I'll upload a part 2 where we're going to look at the interview with Lady Victoria Hervey. We're going to look at body language, facial expression, word choice, and very importantly also, the way this has been edited and presented and what all these things can tell us about what's really going on under the surface. So without further ado, let's dive right into this exclusive spotlight.
When I watched the royal wedding, and there was something, in my opinion, missing in their eyes. It didn't seem real to me.
Would have been nice to be invited.
For my dad.
Oh, for you and your brother as well. I mean, there are plenty of spare places in the pews. George Clooney scored a spot.
Yeah, and he came out later and said he didn't really know them.
All right, so that's Samantha Markle, Meghan's half-sister. Same dad, different moms. And anyone who's ever seen Samantha on any interview knows that Samantha's just not a big fan of Meghan Markle. And that's fine. You know, sometimes we dislike people, sometimes we just don't get along with people, and we have our reasons. But there's a very big trap when it comes to behavioral analysis that we should all be aware of. So almost anyone who's watching this video or anyone who's following the Meghan Markle Prince Harry story has an opinion. There are a lot of people out there who just dislike Meghan Markle, and you have your reasons and they're valid. And there are people out there who say, you know, I don't have a problem with her for such and such reason, and you have your reasons and those are valid as well. When it comes to behavioral analysis, we have to be careful to not like or dislike someone because they share or don't share our opinion. So it's very easy for someone who dislikes Meghan to go, yeah, Samantha's bashing Meghan, she's right, everything she says is right. Or similarly, somebody who likes Meghan to look at Samantha and goes, no, she's just a liar, everything she says is a lie, just because we know what her conclusion is. That's not behavioral analysis at all. So the biggest challenge is to analyze everyone in this video, we have to set our biases and our preconceived notions aside. This analysis is not about Meghan Markle. It's about people speaking about someone. So we have to look at it completely detaching ourselves from whether we agree with what she's saying or not. So let's put our conclusions and our analysis of Meghan Markle aside and look at this as a brand new piece of information. Okay, let's move on to some body language and facial expression. So before we go on, I have to specify Samantha has MS, which is a horrible disease and does affect behaviors enormously. We're going to focus mostly on facial expressions that come in clusters and happen around important or emotional statements. So the interviewer asks, actually he says, it's not much of a question, he says, it would have been nice to have been invited to the wedding, and I want you to look at her face. There isn't even a slight second of agreement. It's not like she goes, you know, like this, and she goes, well, actually, and then kind of presents something against it. From the second the gentleman says that, she doesn't move. In fact, she's still for a very long time. I was like, I thought I hadn't pressed play on my computer. I was like, what's going on? And then she tilts her head and says, for my dad. Now, head tilt is a very vulnerable position because it exposes a very vulnerable part of the body, the neck. So we rarely do this when we're uncomfortable or guarded. Now, there's a lot of reasons we do it. You know, we do it when we're skeptical of something, when we're thinking about something, when we're listening to someone, this might happen, but we rarely do it when we're uncomfortable. One of the places we see the head tilt most often is in sympathy. In fact, a lot of people who study how to de-escalate a situation talk about the head tilt because we immediately have a reflex to calm down with the head tilt. It's very non-confrontational. Now, there's actual research as to why head tilt is less confrontational, and it's mostly because it's less of a glare, right? When your head is upright and you're looking at someone, it feels like a glare because we see both eyes. We focus on both eyes. But the moment that there's even a slight bit of a tilt, our focus goes to just one eye and it feels less like a glare. So head tilt does communicate a softer, more compassionate, more sympathetic communication in a lot of cases. And that's exactly what's happening here. I absolutely believe that Samantha has a lot of sympathy for her father and feels very bad for the way her father has been reflected in the media. I think she's very much on that side. And in this moment, after she freezes at, it would have been nice to be invited, she says, it would have been like, not for me, but for my father. And we're seeing that sympathy with that head tilt. Then the interviewer says, again, doesn't ask, but says, for you and your brother too. It's not like, don't you feel like you and your brother? No, he says it. Like, it sucks for you and your brother too. He's just throwing gasoline on the fire. And then he brings up how, there was a lot of places. There was people who were invited that weren't that close, like George Clooney, for example. So he's kind of trying to instigate this answer. But what I'm interested in is the little cluster of facial expressions we see when he says George Clooney. So we see three very distinct things at the same time. First is an eyebrow flash. The eyebrows go up. Then the eye goes up, but it's in a rolling motion. So the eye goes up like that, like it kind of rolls up. And then we see something really fascinating with the lips. So it looks like a compression because the lips are thinning out. And when the lips thin out, that's consistent with compression. But compression is literally that, compression. You typically see tightness all around over here. We're not seeing that in that moment. She's not tightening the lips. If you look at what's causing that movement, it's the chin moving up. If you look at it right there, you could see that it's the chin moving upwards that's causing the lips to thin out. And because it's happening at the exact same time as those eyebrows going up, to me that looks a lot like a facial shrug. So the best research on shrugging was conducted at Université Paris-Nanterre by Camille Debras, and there are multiple body parts that could go into a shrug. Obviously shoulders, obviously hands, but the mouth and the eyebrows can also shrug. And although we're not seeing a big exaggerated mouth shrug, the gesture, that chin going up, is much closer to a mouth shrug than a lip compression. So what is the meaning of shrugging? I have an entire video, and I'll leave a link in the description, that goes deep into the science and the research on shrugging and all the different things it could denote. But the bottom line is that in most cases, it represents disengagement from a situation. So it's, I don't something. I don't know, I don't care, I don't have anything to add, but even I couldn't agree more. And in this moment, I think that's exactly what it is. The technical term for it is an epistemic shrug, but it basically comes down to, I have nothing to add to this, we agree. So in that moment, plus we're seeing that eye roll, and eye rolling is typically familiar irritation. So something that, oh, here we go again. So when that's brought up, she's like, yeah, totally. And the eyebrows and that little mouth shrug is basically saying, yeah, I have nothing to add to that. George Clooney was invited and her family wasn't. She's like kind of saying like, yeah, we agree. I don't have anything to add to that, but I'm just going to add this one more thing to illustrate just how bad inviting him over us was. I also want you to notice while she's talking about George Clooney, her eyebrows are just flashing up and down, up and down. And eyebrow flash typically comes down to one of three things. One is surprise. One is emphasis, we emphasize something. And three is when we socially connect with someone. Like you say hi to someone, the eyebrows go up. Hey, how are you? Good to see you. So it's a very social thing, the eyebrows. And in this case, I honestly think the reason it's happening so much is that it's a little bit of all three. I think she was surprised that he was invited because he doesn't know them. I think it's emphasis, like he was invited and we weren't. And I think here she's seeking social approval, like trying to get people to be like, oh yeah, that sucks hard. I think it could be all three of these reasons. That's why we're seeing those eyebrows just dance. Now you may have noticed I had some opinions on the way this interviewer is asking questions or making statements and almost introducing a narrative. And I want to talk about that. I want to talk about the way this exclusive is being presented, the angle that they have. But before we do me a huge favor, hit that subscribe button, turn those notifications on for more behavioral analysis and practical psychology content.
Long before she was a duchess, Meghan Markle was a queen. A homecoming queen.
She says she won't.
Who people bowed to. She fished.
That's my daughter in the water. Everything
She danced.
everything
And she loved her daddy. These are the precious family videos of a father who still loves the daughter who no longer speaks to him.
Okay, so a few weeks ago, I did a couple of analysis videos on the Netflix special about Harry and Meghan. And I was brutal. I was so critical about the way it was edited and presented and the obvious agenda that they had in the way that it was done. Because of my experience working on television for a very long time, both in front of and behind the camera, I pay a lot of attention to the decisions that are made on the production side of things. And it's only fair that I look at this exclusive with that same eye and point out the things that indicate to me that there's a certain agenda here. So if we look at these clips that they're showing from Meghan's childhood, it seems like the language and even the clips they've selected are specifically selected to trigger the critics of Meghan, people who dislike Meghan Markle. So at first they show her as being prom queen. And this just solidifies the narrative that, you know, she just wants attention and she wants to be glamorous and she loves that attention and that's all she wants. They even say she's being bowed to. And while they say that, we basically see like two students bowing as the prom king and queen are walking down. It's not like people are bowing to her out of political kind of respect or anything like that. It's just a silly thing being done at the prom, but they're using those words to push that narrative that she likes this kind of attention. Then they say she fished, she danced. And they show footage of that, but she's not really doing either of those things. Like when they say she fished, it's more like she's touching the water and she's immediately disgusted by that dirty water. And again, this caters to that narrative that, oh, she's so snobby and elitist, she can't even touch the water, oh my God, I can't take her. And then when they say she danced, she's kind of just turning in circles, not really doing anything too impressive, which pushes the narrative that she's really not that talented, right? Because a lot of people out there are like, oh, please, like even as an actress, she wasn't that talented. She just wanted to find something that was gonna put her more in the spotlight than her acting career. And then we end with the line about the father who still loves the daughter who no longer speaks to him. So those are choice words. The daughter who no longer speaks to him, not the daughter he lost touch with, not the daughter that he's not as close to anymore. It's all on her. The daughter who no longer speaks to him. Another thing is, look at the title of the exclusive itself. Meghan Markle's fractured US family pleads for reunion with Rogue Royal. Well, is that really accurate? Because Samantha really has no interest in a reunion. She expressed that. I guess the dad said he would love to get back in touch with her, but look at the words. Fractured US family pleads for reunion. So they're using these words purposely to once again look at this under a certain specific light. So you could disagree or agree with the narrative. That's not the bottom line. The bottom line is that it's definitely being presented in a way where Meghan is this big old villain, and there's a lot more that happens that shows that they're really trying to present this narrative. When the father is first introduced, we see him, very slowly walking onto the set, having a hard time, hitting his head. So they're showing us footage that's going to bring out pity for him. There's a scene where they're sitting around at a barbecue casually and just slamming Meghan and Harry and just making jokes at their expense. One of my favorite bits in this whole exclusive that illustrates what I'm trying to say here is they show a scene of her father asking, is it worth getting rid of her father? And then they cut to this random footage of Meghan just nodding to make it seem like that was her answer or her response to that question.
Is it worth getting rid of her father?
Those two clips have nothing to do with each other. They just took this random clip of her nodding, like without much expression, and put it at the end of the statement that he put to kind of get our response to go, oh, look at her, just didn't even care. He's like hurting that she got rid of him, and she's just like nodding. Even if consciously we might be aware that that clip has nothing to do with this, the way it's presented, our subconscious mind just links the two. So all I'm saying is that within this exclusive, there's a certain narrative that they're definitely trying to push.
I grew up as an only child, which everyone who grew up around me knows. And I wished I had siblings.
So before she met Harry, you had no doubt she was your sister?
Called her my sister. My little sister, though, I said, if there was any descriptive qualifier.
Okay, first and foremost, let's look at Meghan's statement. So she says, I grew up a lonely child. I wish I had siblings. And it sucks. The way she says it absolutely sucks. Like if my brother or sister said they wish they had siblings growing up, I'd be like, on the other hand, if we look at the picture that they show just a little bit later, we see a very clear age difference between Samantha and Meghan. And later they talk about her brother and say that when Meghan was born, he was 14. So there's a giant age gap there, and they're half-siblings. So it's possible that in that interview, what she meant was that she wished she had siblings her age, more or less, because that's what the conversation was about. It's a terrible way to say it. I really wish she would have said, you know, I had siblings, but they were quite a bit older than me, so I always wished I had some siblings that were more or less my age. Really bad choice of words. Okay, then the answer. So he asks her, you know, before she married Harry, she was your sister. You considered your sister. And this answer. So she goes, called her my sister. You know, my little sister, for, you know, whenever I needed a qualifier. Can you imagine if you were asked, for those of you who have siblings, is such and such your brother or sister, for you to go, I called them my brother, I called them my sister. Yeah, you know, my little sister. For those who need more details, my little sister is what I say. So it's such a bizarre answer. Like yes would have sufficed. Yep, she was my sister. Of course she was my sister. So I say this on the channel again and again and again. There's no behavior or collection of behaviors that will ever allow you to know for a fact that someone is lying or being deceptive. We have to see clusters that just heighten the probability of deception and make us want to ask more questions. Well, here, verbally, there's something very strange. First and foremost, a non-answer. He's asking, did you consider her your sister? And she's saying, well, I called her my sister. That's a very kind of specific turn of the sentence. I called her that. It doesn't mean you considered her or thought of her or treated her like your sister. It means you called her that. So in name, she was your sister. So she's saying that. And then she specifies my little sister. I called her my little sister. So she's giving a lot of details about an element of the question that is not really that important. And over-specificity is something we pay a lot of attention to because it does tend to happen in deception more often than in honesty. It basically comes down to something very simple that we often say about liars. Truth tellers tell, liars sell. Truth tellers are not concerned with your perception of their answer. They just give you the answer. Yes, no, that's it. It usually is quite direct. Whereas people who are being deceptive know that they need to sell their story because inherently they know that it's not entirely true. So they add details that aren't important and they give a lot more than they should. And for me, this sounded like a sales pitch. I called her my sister, my little sister. I called her my little sister. Look, I don't think she's being super deceptive here. I do think that growing up, she very much considered Meghan her sister. If asked, do you have a sister? She would have said, yes, I have a half-sister. Her name is Meghan. I just think she knows that they didn't always have a sisterly bond and she didn't act like a sister. She didn't always behave like a sister. She didn't maybe feel that sisterly. So she's really focusing on, well, I certainly called her that. I use that word to describe her. And then she's giving us more information about what she called her. Because in that sense, it's very defendable. Because she definitely called her sister, but I think she knows that in behavior, they weren't always that close.
All of his peers at ABC and in television seeing deadbeat dad, cashing in on his daughter.
You think he's been very unfairly treated, don't you?
Oh, God, yeah. I mean, at no time did she come out and say, don't treat my family like that. That's not true.
There really isn't much for me to say on that specific clip, except for in this clip, I believe her. I think once again that when it comes to her father, the hurt that her father is going through, she feels genuinely sorry and she feels real pain for that. In this case, it didn't feel like a sales pitch. Let me know in the comments if you agree. There was almost at an intuitive level, a big difference between this answer where she's just going, yeah, it really wasn't fair what my dad had to go through. She's not buttering it on. She's not adding these useless details. Whereas in the other one, it felt a little more like a sales pitch. Let me know if you agree in the comments. But yeah, I don't have much to say here except for I believe that she's very frustrated about the way her father was portrayed and the repercussions it had on him. Actually, I do have one thing to add about that. It's not about behavior, it's about persuasion, which is something I've studied at great length. And I think there's an element of persuasion coming into play here because she's talking about how Harry said some pretty nasty things about the father publicly. And at no point did Meghan, correct him or say, you can't, don't do that. Don't talk about my family that way, which is what most of us would do, I would like to think. I think the explanation for this, however, is one of the pillars of persuasion, and it's called reciprocity. So reciprocity is a psychological principle that's been researched at great length, And it's been determined that when someone does something for us, we subconsciously feel indebted to do the same back for them. So think about how when you get a Christmas card from someone, you go, okay, well, next year I have to send them one. We're constantly thinking in these terms to try to even the playing ground. And this goes back to the way that we evolved in tribal times. If we did not contribute to the tribe equally to what we were receiving, we would be outcast and it would severely impact our chance of survival. So there are a minority of people out there who take, and they're like mooches, where they take and they give nothing back. And we take note of this kind of thing, and we stay away from people like that, which I guess further illustrates the basic need for reciprocity in human interaction, human behavior. But besides those people, most of us tend to reciprocate when something is done for us. And I think this has a very deep impact on the relationship between Meghan and Harry. So when Meghan came out and said negative things about the royal family, this is the royal family we're talking about, he stood by her. He supported her. He didn't turn his back on her. So when he now goes out and publicly says negative things about her family, and this isn't the royal family, this is just Meghan Markle's family, reciprocity would very much explain why she in that moment couldn't do what Samantha said and said, hey, don't talk about my family that way. Because when she did it, he stood by her. So it's almost like with reciprocity going back and forth, they kind of at no point stopped one another from speaking negatively about the other one's family. And it just kind of snowballed.
You guys are just so much alike. And Meghan really is just a carbon copy. I mean, in the sense that you're really just as bad as each other.
Well, I throw, no, you throw them back.
I mean, she has made money out of selling her story.
No offense.
You have made money sometimes out of selling your story.
That she can afford a much bigger ball.
That clip is like Ben & Jerry's half-baked ice cream. I have a love and hate relationship with it. I really don't know how I feel about that. So there's a lot I like about that. One of the things I like about that is for the first time in this exclusive, for me, we're seeing the production or the interviewer kind of go the other way to kind of put the heat on them now and saying, you know, you're the same. You're all the same. She comes at you, you go at her. You know, you're criticizing her for doing something, but you sold your story as well. I also like the fact that the father is flat out admitting it. You know, he's not trying to run from it and being like, no, she was the one attacking. He's saying, yeah, you know, she throws one, we throw one back. I want you to look at the brother's behavior sitting to the right of the dad. There's a massive shift when the dad takes accountability in that moment. Up until that moment, he's sitting there quite calmly. In that moment, he starts heavily pacifying with his arm on his leg. So pacifying, adapters, self-soothing gestures, manipulators, these are all different terms for the same thing, which is highly researched. And these are gestures that help us adapt to stress. So when we're feeling stressed and want to self-soothe, want to kind of calm ourselves down a little bit, they're typically repetitive gestures with a massage-like component. And we're seeing that right there. He's pacifying on his leg. So I think he's aware of the role that they played in this, and he's a little self-conscious about the fact that it's just being put on the table. The part I dislike about it is what he says right at the end. No offense, but she could afford a much bigger ball. Oh, that just irritated me because really think about it. So what? You know, does that make any of it right? You know, he goes on in this video to talk about how he loves her and he misses her and he just, you know, what should I do to make things better? And all these heartfelt messages to Meghan about how he just wants to get past this. But that is kind of inconsistent with that angle. Like this kind of, you know, no offense, but she has a bigger ball. Like she's in a position where she can make it hurt a lot more than we can make it hurt. It's almost like he's angry that he can't get her with the same impact that she can get them.
Someone suggested she writes you a letter and the Queen said that's a good idea.
Yes, the Queen never read this letter because it was a horrible letter, very insulting and cruel. And I put out a little part of it cruel that I wouldn't put it out. And that's more protecting her than myself.
Why did you give it to the Daily Mail, part of it?
Because at the same time, People magazine were coming out with it. The fact that Meghan had shared with 6 other people, right? I thought I have to get my side into this too.
Okay, so once again, we have to take into account the fact that Thomas has suffered a stroke. So there are things that aren't going to look the way they're supposed to look 100%. He doesn't have the same facial expressions or the same mobility on his face that most of us have. Despite that, in this moment, we're still seeing some stuff on the face that are quite important. Like when he talks about the letter and says, very insulting and cruel, there's a moment where we see the expression of anger. Those eyebrows come down and close together like this. He's staring at the interviewer, and we see the lips for a second thin out. We actually see the movement down here coming up as the lips thin out. And all these things are consistent with anger. We're also seeing a lot of moments in this, particularly towards the end, where his chin is going down like this to guard his neck as he's looking up at the interviewer. And chin coming down, any form of guarding the neck, whether it's with the chin like this, whether it's our hand coming up like this and doing what we call a throat clasp. When we protect our neck, we're feeling defensive and vulnerable. Now, this is something that happens in other parts of the interview as well, so it can be considered part of his baseline. Also, this interview is a lot about something that makes him uncomfortable, his relationship with Meghan, so it makes sense that he would be defensive about a lot of this, but it's happening a lot here while talking about this letter and why he released it. When he's asked specifically about why he released the letter, we're getting a lot of fluff. We're getting a lot of non-answers. We're not getting a direct, like, this is why I did it. So he starts by saying, because at the same time, People magazine was coming out with it, and People magazine was coming out with, okay, but why does that explain why you released the specific letter? And as he says that, he turns to Samantha and he goes, right? And that's a confirmation glance. Like, he's looking for help. He's looking to bring someone else into this narrative to strengthen his position. Because to me, the fact that People magazine was coming out with it doesn't quite justify why you put the detailed letter out. People magazine didn't do that. Then he finally lands on saying that he had to get his side of the story out as well. And whether that's a good justification for releasing this private letter that was written in private, I think that's subjective. I really think it's how you look at it. You know, I could see someone look at this and going, yeah, listen, they were making it seem like she's a victim and he's a horrible person. So there was evidence in this letter that that may not be the case. Or you can look at it and go, no, it's a low blow. That was a private letter that she sent in the mail. She didn't want the public to see it, and he went and published it. I would understand either argument. So I think at first he was trying to run away from it, you know, with that whole People magazine thing, but eventually landed on a semblance of an answer that does kind of make sense to me. But I think a big part of the reason he's dancing around the answer and buying time and trying to bring Samantha into this is because money. I think a part of it must have been money, because he's admit that at that very same time, he was taking staged photographs and selling them to the media. So I think, and he apologized about that, but I think people can kind of understand him selling those, but selling a letter that your daughter wrote to you, that's not a great look. So I think he's trying to sidestep that answer. So I kind of buy the getting ahead of the story thing, but I think a big part of this is trying to avoid the money topic.
Did Meghan give you a return address to write a letter back to her?
No. No.
Nothing?
No. It's pretty much a kiss-off.
Oh, so there's something in this answer that just leaves a giant question mark in my head, and I'm wondering if some of you are wondering the same thing. So he's asked if Meghan provided a return address, and he goes, no, and then there's some silence, and then no, again, but this time with an eyebrow flash. So once again, there's a video on the channel where I go deep into the science of eyebrow flash and why we know this. But whenever those eyebrows flash, if it's not part of a shrug, it typically means one of three things: surprise, emphasis, or social connection, social approval. In this case, I think it's a mix of the second and third. I think there's a bit of emphasis. They're like, no, you know, like, so he says it once and then he says it again with this emphasis, like, no. But I also think there's an element there of social connection, trying to get social approval for this and for us to feel for him in that moment. Because the reason that this is connected to social approval is that it's a display of innocence. The same way our hands go up when we're like, I didn't do anything, it's that same thing. We're showing like, I've got nothing to hide. So I think in that moment, it's like this moment of like innocence, like, no, she didn't give me anything. But here's my thing, here's my question. Harry and Meghan have explained that the reason they wrote this letter is because they got some texts from his phone that seemed suspicious, that didn't sound right. So they suspected that there's some sort of tech interference. They weren't sure, so they decided to write an actual physical letter. if he wants to get in touch with her, they know her number. They know how to get in touch with her. Like it's kind of being presented like she just sent this letter and it's like you have no way of getting in touch with me. Maybe it's possible that she doesn't want to hear from them. Maybe that narrative is possible. But it's kind of strange to me for them to try to sell us on this idea that, you know, here's this letter, bye, you can't get in touch with me, when we know that they have her phone number. They know how to get in touch with her. We have the explanation as to why they wrote a letter, you know, from Meghan's side, but there really isn't a good justification as to why you would have to write a letter back when you can just text her.
You think Harry should play the peacemaker?
I think he should. No.
That clip reminds me of one of my favorite songs growing up from Sesame Street.
But one of these things just doesn't belong here, and now it's time to play our game.
One of these things doesn't belong here. So the question is, you know, you think Harry should play peacemaker, and look at each of their reactions. We see the father and the brother nod, and the father says, I think he could help. But as that's happening, the sister, who's, you know, not paying attention to that, she's in her own little world, she starts gesturing no. She doesn't think Harry can or should or has the ability to play the peacekeeper here. So she's just going no like this with her head, and she has, I wouldn't say a smile, but just a slightly pleasant expression on her face. And when she realizes that he says, I think he could, she darts to him like this, that smile is wiped off, and we even see her left eyebrow dip a little bit. So we have heavy disagreement here. I think she's past the point where she thinks there's any hope. She doesn't think Harry could or even wants to fix this situation, so I think that's where we're getting this no from. It's not so much could Harry, it's that he won't and he doesn't want to. And then when she sees the agreement over here, she just turns and I think she's just never going to be on that same page. I think for her, Harry and Meghan are too far gone.
Would you like to talk to her? Now. Is it possible to put all that water under the bridge and have a chat to her?
I don't think she would do it without a motive. I don't think she's capable of empathy, remorse, or shame.
Oh my God, she hates her. Guys, she hates her. The question was about Samantha, right? Would you like to talk to her? Would you want to talk to her? And there's a long pause there. I don't think there's any part of her who believes that Meghan is capable of not being the worst thing in the world. So in that, first of all, we notice there's a head tilt as she's sitting there. Maybe a part of her is trying to see within herself, like, would I want to talk to her? Like, is that something that I would want? But before she can even get to that thought, there's this big wall that drops and goes, no, that's not even an option, because Meghan would never want that. So I think for her, her own position isn't even a consideration because it's just not an option. So notice how that head tilt straightens out as she answers. So we're feeling comfortable, maybe a little vulnerable. But then when we're talking about Meghan, bam, we straighten that head out. And she goes, no, I don't think that Meghan would even do that without motive. She doesn't have the empathy to do that. So she again just turns it around and takes it a question about her as an opportunity to just go after Meghan again. She is relentless.
If Meghan was here now, what would you say to her?
Let's go somewhere and talk. And I say, what's wrong? What? How can I fix this? Harry, nice guy. I love you for marrying my daughter. Meg, I love you. I love my grandchildren. I'm open to any kind of conversation. Thank you.
Okay, we need to have a talk about this in the comments. I'm really excited to see what your guys' opinion is going to be on this, because there's really two ways to look at this. Remember, there aren't any absolutes in behavioral analysis, and sometimes there's many ways to look at things, and this is a really good example of that. So we often say truth tellers tell, liars sell. So when you feel like you're getting a sales pitch, you know, you might want to ask some more questions. This feels like a sales pitch, but a desperate father pleading to his daughter to talk to him again could also feel like a sales pitch. So it's not necessarily deception. Now, there's some elements in here that I'm wondering why they're there, like that thank you at the end. Why is he saying thank you? Is that part of what he would say to Meghan? Like, I want to talk to you, I love you, thank you? That's kind of bizarre. Is he saying thank you to the interviewer? Is he saying thank you to us to get a little bit of sympathy at the end of that? Like, this was my speech, thank you very much. It kind of felt out of place. Also, Harry, I love you for marrying my daughter. You know, we know you don't love Harry. Like, you know, he said some mean things about you. You guys as a unit have said some mean things about them. When they were sitting at that barbecue, there were some jokes being thrown around. So, you know, had he said something like, you know, Harry, I'd like to have a talk with you, you know, put this behind us, fine. But Harry, I love you for marrying my daughter. I feel like we're trying to be sold a narrative that isn't entirely true. So yeah, for me, on this one, there isn't much of a clear answer. This could be a father desperately just saying, you know, whatever it takes, it's fine. You know, the I love you, Harry, is maybe let's put all behind us. I could love you. Maybe that's what, you know, he's going for. But then on the other hand, there's that thank you at the end. There's this I love you, Harry, which I don't actually buy entirely. And there's this kind of sales pitchy feeling thing to this. But I don't think there's a concrete answer. I think either one can go. So let me know in the comments, what do you think? Are you buying this? Do you think this was legit? Or did that feel like a sales pitch? But please, guys, let's not use subjective language when it comes to this. Like, this is for sure what it is, because behaviorally, it's not for sure anything. Okay, so there it was. Look, for me, it's pretty simple. We often say there's 3 versions of every story. This person's version, that person's version, and the truth. The truth is somewhere in the middle. I think we basically have 2 groups of people here. On one side, we have Meghan and Harry, and on the other side, we have Meghan's family here. And they're all just stuck on their sides, and they're just throwing daggers this way, they're just throwing daggers this way. The father here is at least attempting to, you know, say that he would like to talk to her and he loves her, but then on the other hand, he's admitting that, you know, there was these daggers thrown back and forth, and he's saying still things about this horrible letter. So there is some incongruency here to his message. The sister is beyond hope. I don't think she believes that peace will ever come. So I think there's just 2 people stuck in these extremes. I think it's important to keep in mind moving forward with this topic, and even in the comments of this video, that it's very opinion-based. If you hate Meghan, well, then you're going to agree with their interpretation. In a few days, I'll be posting a follow-up to this one, covering Lady Victoria Hervey's answer when she was asked about Prince Andrew. Let me know what you thought in the comments about this one, and I will see you on that one.